It's always a quiet moment before an event starts. Like the music just drops, everyone gets quiet and looks around. How y'all doing? Y'all good? Salam alaikum. My name is Abbas Muntakim. Very honored to be here with you all and to build with you all. I'm a educator by trade, so it's interesting just seeing the seating. I'm like, y'all want to maybe come to the front and we could really all just be together? It's just my invitation to you all. You don't have to, but I'm inviting y'all. As we're trying to educate, right? As we're trying to build community, sometimes we got to think about space, geography, and land, even in this space we in right here. So very excited, and thank you all for all being here. I'll be your unofficial host and MC, though I will not rap. Excuse my dad jokes. I don't have kids, but sometimes they just come out of me with age. I'll give a little bit of background about myself in this project. I'm the co-chair and co-founder of People's Programs. It's an organization in Oakland, California, where we build what we call grassroots decolonization programs. Have any of y'all heard of the Black Panther Party? Call and response. Some of you, we got to get alive. Yes, yes, right? Okay. So I had family who was in the Black Panther Party, notably Jalil Muntaqim. He was one of the longest held political prisoners and political prisoners of war. He did over 49 years in prison. All right, and some of y'all might be asking, why am I starting with this? But I think it's important we put the contextualization of the land that we're in and the struggle of African people, the struggle of indigenous people, and the land that we're on or at today. Right, so at People's Programs, we build decolonization programs. The Black Panther Party had programs called what? Survival programs. They call it survival programs pending revolution. Right, talking about revolution that has to happen for the freedom land, for humanity. Right, because this is, as we know, the Palestinian struggle, the black struggle for self-determination is not about one nation of people. Right, it's about humanity. And that's what we're trying to do with this project and at People's Programs is how do we support humanity? How do we evolve from one state of being to another state of being? A state of colonialism, right, to a state where people can be free, right? So I thought it was very important to just start with that grounding of the land that we're on, of the genocides that have existed, right, to allow for the genocide of Palestine, if we think about it from a historical framework, right? The genocide of indigenous people in this land, the genocide of African people in this land, and how that has allowed the United States to build into this imperialist nation. So again, I said my background is as an educator. I taught at UC Berkeley for about 5 years. I founded the Fannie Lou Hamer Black Resource Center, and for me, we have to be able to educate to liberate, right? We aren't having these conversations just to say, hey, we got knowledge. We keep this knowledge in our pocket and we pull it out when we need to, like a business card, right? We use education as a way to build towards freedom, as a way to build towards liberation, as a way to have independence, and as a way to have sovereignty. Because if we don't think the right way, can we act the right way? Yeah, no. So we have to have the right thoughts to predate the right action, right? So I had the honor of meeting George when I was a little bit younger, and he was a little bit younger. George, the CEO of GH Tech, and I think we were at a vegan spot. You might have been vegan at the time, right? He was like, hey man, you got that podcast called Hella Black. I mean, he noticed the hand tattoo. I wear it on my hand as well. And ever since then, we've just been building, and he's been volunteering with the organization, People's Programs, a member of the organization, People's Programs, and he approached me about this project, about how are we going to develop education. So I helped serve as supporting the curriculum, right? And wearing different hats. Sometimes I can't fit hats on my head. It's a good problem sometimes with the amount of hair I have. But wearing different hats in the project, being able to support it. So I helped build out the curriculum, and I helped with script coordination, right? And when we're thinking about education in this moment, how do we make education accessible? How do we make education accessible for these kids, right? Huey Newton once said, the youth inherit the revolution. But how are we talking and building with the youth? How are we creating a pedagogy that allows the youth to be able to understand their material conditions, to be able to understand the historical reality, and to say that, hey, I can make the change, right? We have to have youth that are change makers and change agents. So thinking about this project, it is for youth, right? We could talk about freeing Palestine, but if the youth don't have the language to be able to describe their historical conditions, if the youth don't have the language to be able to understand the complexity of imperialism, the complexity of colonialism, the complexity of the Crusades, the complexity of the ongoing genocides then how are we going to have, as humanity, the proper answers to move forward? Right, so this is what this project is all about, is gaining the education, not only for us, but for the youth, so they can be equipped with the skills, the mindset, for us to build organization, to build support, to build community, to build grassroots movements that is true democracy. Not democracy where you put a ballot every 2 years and every 4 years, right? But democracy where people have the power, right? So I want to give you a bit of an overview of today, just some logistical things. As you know, organizations that do, we got to have logistics and understand. So there's the bathroom right there, just in case you didn't know, you got to use the restroom. Well, George, I'll introduce George, the CEO of GH Tech, and he'll talk more about the project, talk more about how it came to be, and some of the aims that we have for it. Then we'll screen the modules. Then we'll have a panel with the different professors and lawyers who are on this first initial screening. And then we'll have a Q&A, right? So I encourage y'all to come in with an open mind, open heart. I encourage y'all to build with one another, right? Because this is really what we're trying to do, is build. And most importantly, we learn with one another. We take what we learn, we pass it on to the next person, and that's how we build strong and sovereign and independent movements to where we can build a revolution. We can build and transform the way we engage with each other as human beings and create a day where humanity is truly free. So without further ado, I would like to welcome my brother George to the stage to discuss a bit more about this project, introduce himself. He's a very humble person. You can know his image ain't even up here, right? But he's the person behind and making all of this work. So if we can give him a round of applause as he introduces his project.
Right on, brother. Peace, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all for being here. My name is George Hofstetter. As you now know, I'm the founder and CEO of GH Tech and a political science student here in New York City. At GH Tech, we serve as a culturally responsive software and curriculum development firm designed to empower marginalized and low-income communities all across the country to understand how to leverage technology for their own self-determination. I grew up originally in East Oakland, California. I come from a family of organizers, educators, and former Black Panther Party members. Growing up in Oakland, also organizing with people's programs, there's this informal political education that you get. I call it a survivor's education. And there were two things that I learned before I started studying political science at Columbia that I believe are absolutely paramount. The first is that the struggles for liberation for all oppressed people around the world are deeply interconnected. In one area where they deny access to opportunity, often they deny freedom in another. The other thing that I learned that was incredibly important was that as an oppressed person from an oppressed community, we need the vocabulary to name the oppression that we face on a day-to-day basis. If we cannot name the systems, the infrastructure, the policies that exploit our communities, that fund a lot of the state-sanctioned violence that's forced upon our communities, it is much harder to create the change that we want to see in the world. Whether the struggles are in Oakland, New York City, Johannesburg, South Africa, or Gaza, these struggles are absolutely interconnected. About a year ago, I was giving a lecture at a school in San Francisco. The title was Educating the Next Generation on AI and How to Use Emergent Technologies for Social Impact. There was a brother in the audience. His name was Amir Nathu. He is the CEO and co-founder of OutSchool. We connected after my talk over the shared belief that building at the intersection of technology, education, and social justice truly has the means to uplift marginalized communities all around the world. Amir was familiar with some of the curriculum that we've developed in the past at GH Tech. We've been operating for about 7.5 years, 8 in February. And he asked if I would be interested in building something new, something that could help the youth better understand the history of Palestine, the resilience of the people, and its ongoing struggle for liberation. And that's how this free 12 video-based module curriculum for youth called Palestine 101 was born. With Palestine 101, we wanted to merge the power of technology, storytelling, and critical pedagogy to make political education accessible for the next generation. Since we've started this project, we've engaged over 19 brilliant individuals. These are the designers, the trauma-informed educators and psychologists, the filmmakers, activists, engineers, and researchers from the US, from the UK, and from Palestine. All of these folks have poured themselves into this work, and we each share a lived commitment to liberation, and that collective spirit is what gives this curriculum its heart. This project is more than a curriculum. It's a reminder that unlearning and relearning are lifelong processes if we aim to decolonize ourselves and decolonize education. If we truly aim to decolonize ourselves and organize toward freedom from white supremacist capitalism, we cannot expect our oppressors to teach us the tools for our own liberation. We have to study, we have to question, and we have to build and share the knowledge that frees us. So my call to action tonight is to continue to build spaces, physical and in digital, where learning is accessible, purposeful, and rooted in our collective liberation. To Amir Nathu of OutSchool, thank you for setting the standard, for being a leader, and in your recognition that young people deserve to shape their futures through accessible and world-building political education. To our globally recognized scholars, our expert instructors, thank you for lending your voices, your courage, and your brilliance to this work. And to my team at GH Tech and Light Theory, none of this would exist without your genius, consistency, and your heart. And before I say anything further, for those of you that have devices that connect to the internet, and that might be a cell phone, please take your cell phone out and go to www.learningpalestine.org. That is www.learningpalestine.org. The modules that you're about to see will not be available to the public just yet. This is our first public screening. To be the first notified, once we release the larger curriculum, please join our waitlist. If you guys are familiar with Professor Rashid Khalidi, who's been giving a Palestine 101 course here at the People's Forum, who withdrew his course from Columbia, for I'm sure very clear reasons that we all read in the news. We will be housing all of his lectures from the People's Forum on our site, along with educational materials accompanied with them, and each of our modules. So please join our waitlist. This has been an absolute labor of love. I am honored to be able to contribute any of my skills and resources to the movement at large. Without further ado, thank you again for coming, and liberation in our lifetime. Let's play Module 1.
But instead, they've now been waiting to return for 76 years.
We do exist.
Hi there. My name is George Bisharat, and I'm a professor at the University of California College of the Law, San Francisco. It's a privilege to present this segment of the Palestine curriculum, What's Law Got to Do with It? Palestine and International Law Explained. International law may sound boring or irrelevant, but it's central to the struggle for justice and equal rights for Palestinians. If you want to understand or even join that struggle, it's worth taking seriously. Let me frame this talk with two simple ideas. Don't worry, we'll explain both. First, law is where power announces its victories. Second, if you don't find the law will find you. Stick with me as I break them down. We'll do that in 4 parts. Part 1, the idea that law is where power announces its victories, followed by Part 2, how that applies to Palestine. Then Part 3, the idea that if you don't find the law will find you, followed by Part 4, how that applies to Palestine. Starting with the first idea, law is where power announces its victories. That means law often reflects what the powerful want, and that's especially true in international law, which governs how nations behave toward each other. Unlike national law, international law has no world government, no global police, and no court with full authority over every country. The United Nations General Assembly can make recommendations, but can't enforce them. Real power lies in the United Nations, or UN, Security Council, where 5 permanent members, the US, Russia, China, the UK, and France, can veto anything they don't like. So how is international law made? Through treaties, which are binding only on the countries that sign them, custom, which is what states regularly do and accept as law, and general principles of law, which are shared ideas across legal systems. It's a fragile system that's threatened when powerful countries break the rules. If other states don't object, or some do and others don't, is that a new rule of customary law in the making? Or are the weaker nations just too scared to speak up? Take Israel's attack on Iran's nuclear facilities, claiming a right of self-defense. But that right is triggered only when you've been attacked or are about to be attacked and have to respond immediately. President Trump used the same logic in bombing Iran. This looks like 2 powerful states trying to rewrite the rules to their advantage. Now let's apply this to Palestine. International law has played a major role in Palestine's history, but not always in just ways. In 1917, Britain issued the Balfour Declaration supporting a Jewish homeland in Palestine, even though Palestinians already lived there and Britain didn't yet control the land. Soon after, that declaration was folded into the British Mandate, giving the Zionist movement its first legal foothold. As a quick reminder, Zionism is the belief that Jewish people should have a homeland of their own, especially in Palestine. Then in 1947, the UN General Assembly voted to divide Palestine into Jewish and Arab states. Palestinians rejected the plan, which was only a recommendation, not a legal requirement. Still, it's often treated as if it legally created Israel. When Israel applied to join the UN, it was told to allow Palestinians it drove out in the 1948 war to return. It never did, and no one enforced that condition. Fast forward to 1967. After Israel occupied the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights, the UN Security Council passed Resolution 242, calling for Israeli withdrawal in exchange for peace. Sounds fair, right? But it didn't mention the Palestinians, didn't call for a Palestinian state, and didn't offer a way for enforcement. More than 50 years later, Israel still occupies much of that land. The US has used its veto nearly 50 times to shield Israel from consequences. So again, what's law got to do with it? Now to the second idea. If you don't find the law will find you. In other words, if people who care about justice ignore international law, powerful countries will keep twisting it to justify injustice. Let's see how this works in Palestine with two quick examples. You've heard Israel has a right to exist. But the truth is, no country has a legal right to exist. Countries exist because other countries recognize them, not because of a legal birthright. Some say Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish and democratic state. But that's asking the world to bless a system where millions of Palestinians live without equal rights. When one racial or ethnic group dominates another through laws and violence, like Israel does to Palestinians, that is apartheid, a crime under international law. No nation has the right to practice apartheid. Another line you hear is, Israel has a right to defend itself. Yes, theoretically, all states do, including Israel, but not while committing genocide, as South Africa has argued before the International Court of Justice, or ICJ for short. And not in land it has illegally occupied for decades. The ICJ has already ruled Israel can't claim self-defense in occupied territories. So its legal duty is to end the occupation. Let's wrap up with some good news. Palestinians and their allies are using international law, and it's starting to matter. South Africa's genocide case is being heard now. Nicaragua is suing Germany for arming Israel. The ICJ has declared the occupation illegal. The International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for Israeli officials. These rulings don't change things overnight, but they build records of truth, increase pressure for accountability, and equip citizens with legal tools to resist injustice. So, what's law got to do with it? Law alone won't bring justice to Palestine, but ignoring it won't either. We must engage with international law, use it, shape it, fight for it to reflect justice, not just power. It's just one tool, but in the hands of people who care, it can be a powerful one.
But instead, they've now been waiting to return for 76 years.
We do exist.
Hello, my name is Ross Siegel. I'm an Israeli-American professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Stockton University, New Jersey. My segment in the Palestine curriculum revolves around two big ideas. The first idea is called Jewish supremacy. This means that in the state of Israel, Jewish people are given more rights than non-Jewish people, especially Palestinians. Jewish supremacy is central to Israeli settler colonialism, which is a process of people moving from their homelands to a different place to settle permanently, taking land, homes, and resources of the people who already live there. In Israel, settler colonialism refers to the process of moving as many Jews as possible to Palestine to create a greater Israel. This justifies ongoing violence against Palestinians. It started in the 1948 Nakba, meaning catastrophe in Arabic, when Israeli forces expelled more than 750,000 Palestinians from their homes and killed in the process around 15,000. The violence has continued through the ongoing Nakba since then, including the Gaza genocide after October 2023. The second idea focuses on how Jewish supremacy shaped the way people understood the new crime of genocide in international law right after the Holocaust. It is also about how international law is now changing because of the Gaza genocide, which may create a future where there's an end to Jewish supremacy and equality, respect, and justice for all people between the Jordan River and Mediterranean Sea. Let's go back to the first idea, Jewish supremacy. Since October 2023, Israeli leaders have talked about it very openly. One example is Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. At the end of October 2023, as Israel sent its army into Gaza, Netanyahu talked about a story from the Bible about a group called Amalek. In the story, the ancient Israelites, ancient Jews, saw Amalek as their most dangerous enemy. They believed Amalek was evil and had to be completely destroyed. When Netanyahu used that story, he was comparing Palestinians in Gaza to Amalek. He was saying they were enemies who had to be destroyed to keep Jewish people in Israel safe. The Jewish supremacist belief system here places Israeli Jews as the descendants of the ancient Israelites and modern Israel as representing the original people of the land stretching back thousands of years. This ignores that Palestinians are native to the land, the indigenous people of the land, and it legitimizes Israeli settler colonialism. This idea about Amalek wasn't only used by Israel's leaders. Soldiers and officers in the Israeli army were also saying it during the war in Gaza. One example is an officer named Captain Chai Chemo. He's an Israeli army deputy commander of a company. On January 30th, 2024, he posted a video where he shared what he thought the Amalek story means.
הקרבנו להם שטח עצום, הרגנו בהם עשרות אלפים של עמלקים. מצד שני עוד לא הגענו להיות צבא מוסרי, וזאת המלחמה האמיתית של עם ישראל. כל השאר יסתדר אחר כך בקלות. מוסרי זה להבין שכל ערבי הוא חפץ חשוד. אולי הוא טוב, אולי הוא פצצה, אבל הוא חשוד. מוסרי זה להוציא להורג את כל המחבלים אחרי שחוקרים אותם. מוסרי זה לכבוש וליישב את כל חלקי ארץ ישראל, וכל מקום שנשאיר בו כן צרעות, יתנקם בנו במוקדם ובמאוחר.
Captain Chemo used the story of Amalek here as the basis of a moral framework that justifies seeing all Palestinians as enemies, as killable, including children, as Chemo said, every Arab. This is also included in a call to take over and live and thus settle the land of Israel, that is Greater Israel. This is just one example. There's thousands of videos like this one by Israeli soldiers and officers that show a link between clear calls for genocide by Israeli leaders and the ways the Israeli army uses violence on the ground in Gaza. Netanyahu used the biblical story of Amalek to express, quote, an intent to destroy Palestinians in Gaza as such. This language fits the crime of genocide, according to the 1948 United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. Indeed, Captain Chemo understood Netanyahu's words in this way, to mark all Palestinians in Gaza as enemies, showing the intent to commit genocide. Now, how is it possible that this first ever live stream genocide has been happening in front of our eyes for 22 months now? One way to answer this question is by looking at the Jewish supremacist beginnings, not only of Israeli settler colonialism, but also of the idea of genocide and the new crime of genocide in international law. This brings us to the second big idea, how Jewish supremacy shaped the new concept of genocide that was created in international law right after the Holocaust. This new crime was shaped in relation to the idea that the Holocaust of Jews during World War II was a unique event in human history. It was seen as more terrible than genocide as formulated in the 1948 UN Genocide Convention. This made it seem like the Holocaust was more important, more terrible than other genocides, including genocides against indigenous people in the US, the transatlantic African slave trade, and genocides in the Soviet Union in the years right before World War II. This hierarchy also made people ignore the genocidal violence of the Soviets and the Western Allies during World War II, including the dropping of 2 atomic bombs on Japan by the United States. In Western countries, the Holocaust genocide hierarchy made people see Jews as the purest victims and only as victims, a move enabled by the central place of Jews in the Western Judeo-Christian world. This idea is also part of Jewish supremacy. It portrayed a people who can only be ultimate victims as having therefore a superior morality. This led to the common view in Israel and the West about the Israeli army as the most moral army in the world. Accordingly, it became hard to believe that Israel, perceived as a country of Jewish survivors of the Holocaust, could commit any crime under international law, let alone genocide.
Israel must again be a safe place for the Jewish people. And I promise you, we're going to do everything in our power to make sure that it will be.
This is why Israel hasn't been held responsible in the international legal system, which has instead covered up settler colonialism of the Israeli state through decades of Israeli mass violence against Palestinians, leading to Israel's genocide in Gaza. But the Gaza genocide has revealed that the international legal system is broken and that it's built on Jewish supremacy. The huge amount of live-streamed evidence, such as Captain Chemo's video, has led to the breakdown of protection for Israel in the international legal system. There is now a charge of genocide that South Africa brought against Israel in the International Court of Justice, the highest court of the United Nations that deals with state responsibility, and there are arrest warrants for war crimes and crimes against humanity against Netanyahu and his former defense minister Yoav Gallant at the International Criminal Court, which deals with individual criminal liability. Israel's ongoing genocide in Gaza also represents an assault on this potential for transformation within the international legal system, because there does exist the possibility of holding Israel accountable for its genocide against Palestinians now. Such accountability carries the potential for justice, one that could help shape a future not rooted in Jewish supremacy, but in the equal recognition of the rights, belonging, and dignity of Palestinians, Jews, Christians, and all others living between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea.
But instead, they've now been waiting to return for 76 years.
We do exist.
Hi, my name is Malak Afana, and I'm a civil rights attorney and the director of the Palestine Center for Public Policy. But before I ever entered the courtroom, I was a student activist for 7 years with my college and law school students Justice for Palestine, SJP, a student organization movement dedicated to Palestinian liberation. So this segment of the Palestine curriculum is From the River to the World, organizing for liberation through schools, streets, and the law. I organized teach-ins and drafted the first bylaw at Berkeley Law adopted by student organizations to support the Boycott, Divest, and Sanctions movement, BDS, a tactic of economic pressure launched by Palestinian popular movements to end international complicity in apartheid. I disrupted our law school events, demanding our school divest from contracts with weapons arms manufacturers. I was doxxed, surveilled, and even physically assaulted. But I learned to fight smarter and build power collectively. In this segment, we'll walk through 3 powerful sites of resistance. Part 1, how digital activism helps spark global action. Part 2, how student protests transformed campuses into front lines of solidarity. And Part 3, how grassroots lawyering is being used to fight repression and build power from below. The fight doesn't stop at the protest line. It continues online, in courtrooms, through the behind-the-scenes labor of building community, and across global coalitions. Across TikTok and Telegram, organizers are rewriting the narrative that governments long controlled. They are naming apartheid and demanding liberation in real time. Take the hashtag #MaskOffMaersk campaign led by the Palestinian Youth Movement. This campaign exposed Maersk, a multinational logistics company, as a key actor in the military supply chain, transporting military cargo from the US and Europe to Israeli forces. Organizers built online toolkits, launched research hubs, and coordinated protests across ports. They turned a shipping giant into a global symbol of complicity in Zionism. In 2024, Spanish port workers declared they would no longer load weapons shipments to Israel, forcing the government to block Maersk vessels. As Maersk rerouted to Morocco, over 1,500 protesters gathered in Tangier and in Tunisia, and port clashes broke out. Photos of the mass demonstration circulated widely on social media, sparking momentum across continents. These images weren't just powerful, they were effective. In June 2025, after sustained pressure from the global BDS movement, Maersk publicly announced that it would cut all business ties with Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank. A shipping giant was forced to concede not because of governments, but because of people. Similarly, another form of frontline organizing took hold, the student encampments of 2024. Across more than 100 campuses in the US and globally, students set up protest encampments demanding divestment and full liberation for Palestine. These encampments became spaces of political education and community defense. Online, students shared tactics for de-arrests, resisting police, and protecting each other from surveillance. Across Signal threads, they shared templates for press statements, protest demands, and digital security protocols. And the people of Gaza saw them. Photos circulated online of children in Gaza holding signs that said, "Thank you, students." Resistance groups inside Palestine issued statements saluting the encampments, drawing parallels between student organizing in the US and those in Palestine during the time of the First Intifada. The First Intifada was from 1987 to 1993, and it was a mass uprising led by Palestinians under Zionist rule. Similar to the encampments, the participation of school youth comprised the blood of the revolution. In the first year of the Intifada, 166 students were martyred, and more than half of the total count of martyrs were students. Today's student movement, both offline and online, stands in that tradition. And in response to mounting repression, students and allies turn not to the law as savior, but as a tool in the hands of the movement. Palestinian revolutionary Basil al-Araj reminded us, the beginning of every revolution is an exit from the system that enshrines oppression in the name of law and order. Grassroots lawyering lives in the tension of a system that calls the criminalization of resistance as legality, while we call it repression. It uses the tools of the law while knowing when to break from its terms. At the Palestine Center for Public Policy, a Palestinian-led organization, we've launched legal research into how universities coordinate with police and private security to repress student protests. At University of California, UC campuses alone, over $29 million was spent suppressing Palestine activism this spring, mostly on police and surveillance tech. So we're using California's Public Records Act to force disclosure of contracts and communications with outside agencies. Just like movement lawyers did during the Black Lives Matter uprisings of 2016, we're demanding transparency to fuel accountability. And we're not alone. In Chicago, the Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR, filed the first ever lawsuit against Canary Mission, using doxing liability laws. Across the country, Palestine Legal is defending students in disciplinary hearings. Movement lawyers are on the ground, at the encampments, in jail support roles, writing Know Your Rights toolkits, and guiding community defense plans. In recent years, over 35 U.S. states have passed laws penalizing people who support BDS. In Texas, a speech therapist sued after losing her job for refusing to sign an anti-boycott pledge. She won. In Georgia, journalist Abby Martin was barred from speaking at a university for refusing to denounce BDS. A judge ruled the law unconstitutional. These lawsuits prove that boycotts are political speech and that the First Amendment still matters. From encampments to courtrooms, from Gaza to our ports, our resistance is global, generational, and grounded in love. They tell us to be silent, but every right we have ever won came from refusing to be quiet. Because as Basil al-Araj reminds us, the revolutionary is the one whose life begins with rejection by society, marked by courage, rebellion, and intelligence. That is the legacy we inherit, and the world we're fighting to remake. As we fight for liberation, remember this: repression is a sign of fear. They fear our clarity, they fear our unity. They fear the power of a generation that is no longer asking for justice, but building it. Until return, until liberation, until freedom, from the river to the sea.
So how about that? It's pretty dope. I don't know, just for me reflecting, of George first reaching out to me and us getting together and writing a curriculum and reaching out to different experts and having different conversations and turning something from paper into a product that can help us think about how we can free the land, think about how we can have liberation, think about how we can develop sovereignty. So I want to just give a round of applause to all the experts that are in the room and for y'all for being here and engaging with us. So now we'll take about 5 minutes to be able to set up the panel so we can get a little bit deeper into the discussion. As you can see, you might be sitting on your paper and pen. If not, it's in your hand. So I'd encourage you to think about what questions that might have came up from the curriculum and what questions that will come up through the panel, and write down that good question. Emphasis on good question. Make sure you know you're thinking about it, because this is what we want y'all to do, is be able to, how do we think together, right? How do we think and educate with one another, right? So the bathroom is right there behind y'all, and then I'll encourage y'all to get to know your neighbor. You know what I'm saying? We ain't just here to learn, we're here to build and learn together. So we'll take about 5 minutes and we'll see you soon. I'll do that towards the end.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Hi, so nice to meet you. Love the episode. How does it feel? Yeah. Coming together. Yeah. Yeah. The editing is fantastic also. Like, I think, obviously you're editing, recording, but seeing the final product, everything together, I was like, oh my god, this is amazing. Like, yeah. Thank you. No, thank you. Yeah, yeah. San Francisco. Wow. I have FOMO from San Francisco all the time. Oh my god.
We might be able to do some birthday.
Oh, okay, let me know. I missed the Bay. Yeah.
That's the one where you guys are going to switch places. Dr. Bishop's is an open.
Okay, awesome. And he's zooming in right now, right? Yep. Okay.
Yeah, and then we have another two. And then we have the last four that we need to do that quarter before we do the London. That one would like Dr.
Yeah.
It's a tough one to track down. But Reggie, it's been an incredible help. Not for him, wait for his schedule. You would have been here if it wasn't
Are you sitting? Okay, awesome. Yes, yeah. Yeah, I got my own. Thank you. Yeah, I moved. I graduated from law school in May of 2024 and then moved out here for work. To New York? Yes, yeah. But my family's, I'm from Chicago originally. Yeah. What about yourself? You are Philly. Okay, so 2 hour drive? Hour and a half? Okay.
All right, salam alaikum. Alhamdulillah. At people's programs, we have a chant that we do to kind of get people's attention, but also to bring some energy into space. You know, I just had another cortado, so I'm feeling even more energized. But I'll say free the people, and y'all will say free the land. We're going to do that 3 times. Y'all good with that? Y'all sure? Positive? All right, we're going to see. We're going to hear, actually. Free the people? Free the land. Free the people? Free the land. Free the people? Free the land. By any means, and all means. Because that's really what we're here to do today, is thinking about how do we free the land, right? How do we stop and end settler colonialism? How do we build a humanity where people are free? And we understand that education, as Malcolm says, as El Hajj Malik al-Shabazz says, education is the passport to our future. I know a lot of people got their passports, but think about that. What did he really mean by that? He's thinking about world building, right? This term that is used a lot, but what do we mean by world building? We're meaning taking away imperialism, right? The chokehold of imperialism from oppressed people to where we can actually have a free world, a free humanity where our people are liberated. So I just again want to thank the panelists, our esteemed scholars, organizers, movement makers, because I think when we think about this curriculum and how succinct it is, like it's very hard to do something in 8.5 minutes. It's even harder to do it when the lights are shining on your face, the horns and the sounds of New York, right? But this is a very beautiful project to be able to give to people, right? To be able to be free, right? To where we can free our minds through accessible education. So Malak, let's start with you. You know, since we first met at UC Berkeley, so I was an undergrad at UC Berkeley. I ended up working there, teaching there. I was a part of the BSU, so in 2014, with the death of Michael Brown, we were organizing and fighting and had 10 demands for institutional change. And we made a lot of work happen on campus, a lot of changes happen on campus. And then I co-founded the Fannie Lou Hamer Black Resource Center. So I was always very active on campus. If you're from the Bay Area, we use a term called hyphy. I was really hyphy, man, hyperactive. Like, hey, we gonna get busy. When I saw you on campus, I was like, oh, you hyphy. Like, you getting it. You shutting down the campus. You yelling. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's the energy, like the spirit. You know what I'm saying? Like the spirit you can't fake. Some people try to when we see it, right? But there was an energy there, and seeing you on the campus protests and engaging in struggle and taking the mics. The mic was hot. Taking the mics, you know, I was like, oh, this sister is powerful. You know, so one thing you said in the curriculum is how do we fight smarter? And I think that's something that we have to think about in this historical moment that we're in, is how are we actually fighting to win versus fighting to fight? And there's a difference. You could fight to fight and you end up with a few black eyes. But you fight to win, you might end up with a black eye, but you got that belt, you got that championship. I like boxing, so I go with the analogies. So can you talk to us a little bit about how you evolved to fight to win and how that has changed, and especially with your grassroots organizing and now being a lawyer, how has that influenced how you move, how you educate, how you change, how you movement build?
Yeah, thank you so much to everyone for being here. It's such an honor. And
Yeah, also a big tribute to Abbas so much also for all the work that he's done in the Bay Area. I think it's always so important to give homage to, organizers that have been in this struggle for generations, who really set up the systems that we are able to follow, to replicate, and to innovate with. And I think when I say fight smarter, I think what I'm really talking about is an evolution in how I understand power and how movements can sustain themselves while really confronting systems that are designed to exhaust us. As I said in the video, I've been organizing for Palestine since I was 18, back when people thought that Palestine was still Pakistan. And so we've come a long way. But being someone who was always in our college SJPs and then law school SJPs, and then I was a Palestinian Youth Movement member, and I worked for the US Campaign for Palestinian Rights all at the same time, while maybe not going to as many law school classes as is encouraged. I really felt this pressure to sort of be everywhere all at once, to be a chant lead and to run security and then to develop strategy. And obviously that's not sustainable. And that type of energy, being hyphy, comes from, like the desire to really see liberation and see it in all different avenues. But I realized really quickly that that's not sustainable. And movements are not built on a reactive response. And so I always think about that Malcolm X quote that we are not outnumbered, we are out-organized. And that's something that being in the law specifically really comes into play when I'm doing the work that I do. I work at a Muslim law firm in FIDI, and we're currently doing a civil litigation case, co-counsel with CARE New York, Council of American Islamic Relations, suing the NYPD on behalf of 9+ pro-Palestine protesters that were a part of a Within Our Lifetime protest that were brutally assaulted by the NYPD. And so in that case, the goal is not necessarily, I think when you're thinking about fighting, some would say, okay, we're here to represent these 9 protesters to get them the relief that they're owed for their injuries. But organizers and movement lawyers are thinking, this is systematic of a bigger problem. What we need to bring to light is not only the stories of these 9+ protesters, but we need to bring to light the fact that the NYPD has one of the biggest police budgets in this nation, that they're specifically trained, especially post 9/11, to target Muslim and pro-Palestinian communities. That there's a reason that when there's protests specifically held in Bay Ridge, a predominantly Palestinian and Yemeni community, there is an outsource and a high increase of units that are dispatched specifically there. We need to shed light on the fact that this even happened because the NYPD is given directives to see kufiyas and watermelon symbols as symbols of hate, and something that is actually a target and a threat to the NYPD. So I think that is something when I think about fighting smarter. And I also think that comes from the fact that this is a lesson that we learned in the first Intifada, which I had referenced in the episode, that after the first Intifada, there were 4 factions of Palestinian political parties that came together, UNLU, and they formed these popular committees. And these committees would create and address needs for healthcare, for education, for agriculture, for the supply of essential necessities. And they came together despite their political differences, and they would distribute literature. And they built an infrastructure for a movement that was sustainable. Yes, it emerged as a reaction to 4 workers in Gaza that were killed by the Israeli forces, but it became so much more. It evolved into the ability to have schools underground when universities were being targeted. It made sure, and it carried the torch for generations to come. And so I think when it comes to fighting smarter, we're not here to have a rapid response. I think that's something that causes intense burnout. It's something we see now where, you see quote unquote ceasefire fatigue. People are like, okay, great, we have a ceasefire and now organizing has stopped. That wasn't the movement. That was a response to a time. We're here to talk about a free Palestine. Matter of fact, we're not just here to talk about a free Palestine. We're here to talk about how are we going to rebuild that free Palestine when Israel is toppled. We need to talk about how are we going to actually go back into the land and take back that land. So yeah.
I'm gonna start clapping because I'm like, hey, you know, that's just me. You talked a lot about movement building, right? Fighting smarter. And I think sometimes in the movement, there's this idea that you're just supposed to quit your job, join the revolution, be, I don't want to use a bad word, but be a little bit bummy sometimes. And you're not supposed to have a skill set to be able to offer the movement build, right? But that's, I think, the difference between your reaction and responding versus, no, how are we being proactive to build a movement, right? So you got your JD, right? You're a community lawyer. How has your job, you know, now working in the Palestine Center for Public Policy, how is that advocacy now shifting the way that you move and movement building specifically?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think that the way I view it is at the Palestine Center for Public Policy, which was founded by Dr. Hatem Bazian, a professor at UC Berkeley, who also founded American Muslims for Palestine, Muslim Legal Fund of America, and SJP actually in this country. He really wanted a space where legal research would not necessarily just sit on a shelf. It would be something that would actually be utilized and serve movements. And I think something that I even reiterated in the episode is that as a movement lawyer, I'm not here to delegate where the movement goes. I'm here to serve organizers. That is my role exclusively. And so how do we do that in the research that we do? I see it in two ways. I think one example is Hatem Bazian and I and a bunch of other coalition partners drafted a statutory initiative that is called the California Freedom to Boycott Act. And it comes out of inspiration from the fact that there are so many people that are quietly forced to sign these anti-BDS clauses in their contracts, that they're being fired because they are saying that our pension funds and our retirement money should not be invested in a university that has contracts with the Israeli forces and actively sends weapons to them in the middle of a genocide. And so what it does, and what I appreciate about that, is it emerged from working with movement lawyers and coalition partners that are all invested in a shared vision of liberation. And I'm not one to sit here and say that electoral politics are going to free us. I don't believe that. But I can see that this is one avenue of being able to have something driven by people, that this will ultimately uplift them. I think the second thing that I see is that at the Palestine Center, we had a research team dedicated to filing public records requests. And so we looked into UC Berkeley, UC Irvine, and UCLA. And so we sent over records requests, a lot of which are still unanswered, so that is a battle to still keep fighting. And we looked into how much money is being invested into facial recognition technology. I mean, at UC Berkeley during the encampments, there's a gate, it's called Sather Gate, and it's a historic site of protest, and they installed facial recognition technology at that gate. There's a reason that so many of our encampment leaders were facing disciplinary hearings because of that. We're looking into how much money is put into private security that was there to monitor the campus and to make sure that, you know, if students tried to occupy buildings, that they would be the first people sent out there. And so we're finding that there's millions and millions of dollars being put just within 2024, just within 2025, that there's ways for location services to be tracked of students if they're using the campus Wi-Fi. These are things that are not being talked about. And so when it comes to also equipping our organizers with knowledge, when you're thinking about a know your rights, it's not just, you know, when it comes to jail support, it's things like this. It's okay knowing what are the proper technologies and procedures we should be following when we're helping our students and giving them advice. I think, you know, the last thing I'll say is, being a movement lawyer, and something I appreciate when I was organizing, is even in most of our SJP direct actions, we consulted with the National Lawyers Guild before we did anything. We had lawyers on a hotline, on standby. We went through every single part of our plan because those lawyers were not there to tell us, don't do it. They were there to say, okay, do it, and then here's the support you're gonna get. Here's the possible charges that might come up. Here's the line of action. And so I think that's kind of how I see my role.
See, I put my educator hat. I'm like, there's some key takeaways of what she said. Skill set and movement building. How do we have the skill sets to be able to support movements? And I would encourage everyone in the room to think about, what is your skill set, right? Professionally, socially, politically, what is your skill set? And then how do we be able to use that skill set to movement bill, right? Because to give contextualization even to New York, if you think about Afeni Shakur and the New York 21, she put the state on trial. She learned the skills right then and there to defend herself, right? We've seen this happen in the Black liberation movement, right? So how do we think about now as we capacity build? We talk about capacity a lot. Everyone says they have capacity, but I'm like, as we capacity build, how do we think about these skills so we can actually build movements that support our liberation? So thank you so much. Malak and George, Brother George, you can hear me on there? The Zoom. I'm testing you out. We're still trying to get your sound to make sure it's good. You can hear us? You can give a little mic check for me.
Yes, I can hear you. Sorry.
No, it's all good. We hear you loud and clear. Appreciate you, my brother. So both of y'all have backgrounds in law, right? So when you see your segment, it's to no surprise that we see the law as this tool of hegemonic Western oppression, right? Hegemony, right? Of supremacy of the law being used to dictate movements, land, the extraction of natural resources, the creation of political prisoners and political prisoners of war, the justifications used for genocide, right? But at the same time, if we understand history, we've seen how legal scholars, how movement people, movement builders, revolutionaries have used the law, right? If we think about Huey Newton, that brother studied the law and was standing with a shotgun and saying penal codes and talking about OPD, man, yeah, I got the shotgun, it's the law. We saw the law change. But how do we use law as a tool in our toolkit for liberation? And George, we'll start with you, please.
Okay, sure. So first of all, warmest greetings to everybody there, to you, Abbas, to Raz, to Malak, and to everybody in the audience. It's really great to be with you. I think what we've seen over the last 2 years in particular, since October 7th, 2023, is kind of the best and the worst of international law. And I'm going to address international law in particular. On the one hand, the best that we've seen is the International Court of Justice, which is the judicial organ of the UN system, has really shown up big time. It has demonstrated unusual courage and resolve in 3 important cases related to Palestine. The first one that probably most of you have heard about is South Africa versus Israel, which is the genocide case. And in that case, the International Court of Justice in January of 2024 found a plausible case of genocide. And it ordered Israel to curb its actions. That case is still pending. The ultimate conclusion we still don't know, but I'm actually fairly optimistic that the court will ultimately find that Israel has committed genocide in the Gaza Strip. And then there was another equally important judgment that was issued in July of 2024 that was an advisory opinion that found that the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip both were illegal in themselves, not just that they entailed various violations of international law, but the very occupations themselves were illegal. They violated rights of Palestinian national self-determination and also the UN Charter's prohibition against the acquisition of territory by war. So, and then finally, in just a couple weeks ago, the UN, the ICJ rather, found that the Israel has to cooperate in aid distribution and other forms of relief with the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, or UNRWA, which is the special agency that the UN created back in 1949 to serve the needs of Palestinian refugees. So, and then even the International Criminal Court, which is a different court established by treaty in 2000, and less established, less well-funded than the ICJ, has found its way to issuing arrest warrants for Israeli leaders, for Prime Minister Netanyahu and also Defense Minister Gallant. So that's kind of the best of international law. Its capacity to articulate principles of justice and of equality and restraint even when very powerful actors are pushing in the opposite direction. Now, the worst is that none of these rulings have changed any of the realities on the ground. They haven't stopped the bombings, the starvation, the ongoing violent displacement and dispossession of Palestinians. But I think that, the thing to keep in mind is that law, especially international law, is not only an instrument of coercion, it's also a discourse or a discussion, a way of talking about legitimacy. And these rulings, I think, give movements and civil society actors really powerful tools to mobilize and persuade. And we're already, we have been seeing that process in action. So, from groups like the Hind Raja Foundation, established in Europe, it has been submitting evidence of war crimes to governments from all the way from Brazil to Belgium when Israeli soldiers or officials visit, and on to campaigns pressing for arms embargoes and prosecutions under universal jurisdiction, divestment from companies complicit in occupation, just as Malek has shown in her module. So, my faith in the enforcement of international law has weakened, but my faith in its language as a tool of conscience and political struggle has actually deepened. And I still think it offers us a vocabulary for justice, and with sustained organizing, it can become a source of power. Now, when the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, finds a plausible case of genocide, that permits others, from Holocaust and genocide scholars to lawyers to political leaders, to do the same. And vice versa, of course. The conclusions of scholars like Raz and others also give courage to courts. It sort of creates a permission structure. And it's no coincidence now that 77% of Democratic voters in the United States believe that Israel has committed genocide in Gaza. And, as a person who's been involved in the struggle for justice and freedom in Palestine for nearly 60 years, I can say that we've never seen a situation like this, one so ripe with opportunity. The Palestinian people have made incredible sacrifices over the last 2 years, and I see it as a sacred responsibility to make good on those sacrifices, to translate those sacrifices into change. And that brings me to my final point. I may differ a little bit with Malek in this respect. I would say don't overlook electoral politics. There's every reason to be cynical about elections here in the U.S. and elsewhere. And, it seems like we're always looking at a choice between the lesser of two evils, and that's really not very inspiring. But just as power begins in the streets, and I definitely believe that, it ends in the hall rooms of Congress and elsewhere. And we can't afford to not translate that great potential that we've built with this popular organizing into actual policy change. And that happens in the halls of power. Now, you in New York have just proved how consequential an election can be and how potent a force popular organizing can become. So even before Zohran Mamdani has taken office, he and you have shaken the political landscape and opened up possibilities for anti-genocide candidates from all the way from Maine to California. So I would say, along with all of the other organizing that you do, vote, phone bank, canvas, donate if you can, even small dollars. And together we can make it happen, but only if we all pitch in and play our roles.
So there's some difference of opinions showing up, and I know you're a lawyer, so I'll give you the opportunity for a rebuttal. Is there anything you want to add before we go into the next question? Or?
I think
Are you at? Oh, okay.
Oh, sorry, I'm trying to, my bad.
I think I agree in terms of the last part about playing our role. I think when it comes to especially heavy emphasis on the donate part, I think something that people are not seeing if they're not in the legal space is that after October 7th, there were numerous pro bono attorney referral networks that popped up. And they popped up with people willing to give their time to represent students in disciplinary hearings and to help them out. And that was incredible. But there was only around 35 to 40 people that were able to do that. And that was not sustainable because if attorneys are working sometimes a 60 to 70 hour caseload a week, and then on top of that being asked to help pro bono, that's not a very sustainable method. And then you have people, no shade, in corporate law that make $250,000 to make corporations richer. We have an issue. And I say this as someone who sees that there are so many students that need our support and need our help, and yet they're unable to afford that help. And so I think something I want to emphasize, going back to that Malcolm X quote about not being outnumbered but out-organized, sometimes we're out-resourced. And so I think that people need to really open up those wallets and start thinking about where are we making our contributions to. And I think it's very easy in this time and place. People give a lot of gratitude to students, and they say, the student encampment they were heroes. And they were heroes. But Zohran Mamdani, one of the main reasons that man won was because of his pro-Palestine beliefs, which we have seen and are reflected in the polls, but he owes the success of his campaign to the student encampment organizers. He owes it to the people at the resistance in Palestine. He owes it to the numerous amount of Muslim women who had their hijabs assaulted and taken off by the NYPD for being at protests. There have been people along the line that have risked so much and have contributed to his campaign as well, to now have such a Muslim pro-Palestine figure in this city. So I think that's the one thing I add about the playing the role, and that there's so many other people that we are not seeing that are getting the help that they deserve as well. So I completely agree with the last part as well.
Thank you. Dr. Segal, Brother Roz, how you doing? Good. I really enjoyed your segment, especially your framing, right? Naming Zionism in particular as a formation of Jewish supremacy, because I think if someone like me says that, someone in the Black radical tradition, Black liberation movement, a Muslim sometimes will face attacks for naming the religious foundations of Zionism, right? Because I think in the West, with secularization and modernity and trying to remove religion, right? What happens is when you bring it up, they're like, nope, that's not religious. There's no religious underpinnings. So can you talk a bit more about why you frame it, Zionism, as Jewish supremacy?
Oh, thank you. Thank you everyone for being here, for George, Bess. It's a pleasure and honor to be on a panel here. Jewish supremacy, so there is, of course, religious element to it. There's an element of thinking about uniqueness of the Israeli state, and I'll say more about this. So the Judeo-Christian world, and this is how uniqueness comes into it. But I'm talking about Jewish supremacy primarily also as in the national terms, right? And so settler colonialism, of course, is the practice, and we're seeing it now, very explicitly in the Israeli case. It's expressed in unashamed terms, directly from government ministers to media in Israel, social media, on the corner of streets, people talking about making Gaza Jewish, people talking about displacement of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank and East Jerusalem. There's no shame anymore about talking about, in a very direct way, about settler colonialism. But this is based, when you think about settler colonialism in the United States, for instance, we think about white supremacy, right?
Here, so as the ideological basis, here we're talking about, in the Israeli case, we're talking about Jewish supremacy. Yes, there's a religious element to it, but it's mostly about the national project and about thinking about the Israeli state as a unique kind of a state, right? A state that is not capable, actually, of perpetrating any crime under international law. Therefore, when we think about impunity for Israel in the international legal system, this is where it comes from, right? This uniqueness element, let alone, of course, genocide. So it's very important to emphasize, actually, the Jewish supremacist element. And it's easy to think about it, actually, when we think, for instance, about laws in Israel. So Israel doesn't have a constitution. It doesn't have a constitution, actually, in order to maintain its Jewish supremacist framework, but it has basic laws instead. And one basic law, which was introduced in 2018, is called the Jewish Nation State Basic Law, right? And it's really, again, a very explicit Jewish supremacist framework that relegates all non-Jewish citizens of the state, including the 21% who are Palestinian citizens of Israel, that is in addition to the millions of Palestinians under Israeli military occupation in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. It relegates these 21% Palestinian citizens, about 1.8 million people, to second-class citizenship. It also denies them the right for national self-determination in their historic homeland. And the law also is actually framed explicitly, again, in settler colonial terms. That is, settling the land, right, is framed in the law as the rationale of the Israeli state, right? So I think that there's many more examples that we can give, but I thought that the legal one is very important in the context of a discussion that is a lot about the law. And it's important, again, to emphasize the Jewish supremacist element framing of settler colonialism in the Israeli case, because also of the issue of uniqueness, right? We need to understand why we arrived in this moment of explicit Israeli genocide in Gaza. And one of the reasons that we've arrived to it is because we have been living in a world that accepts for decades and decades and decades, right, crude violations of Israel, of international law by Israel, the settler project itself. I mean, this is black letter law, occupying power, just post-1967. Talk, of course, the 1948 Nakba and the ongoing Nakba since then, but if we think just the post-1967 settlement of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip, that's very simple black letter law, and occupying power is not allowed to settle its population in occupied territories, certainly not for decades on end. We've become accustomed to these crude violations of international law because of impunity, and this impunity is really rooted in this Jewish supremacy, this idea that the Israeli state really is a unique kind of a state, right? That's another reason to really stress the Jewish supremacist element.
So for folks in the crowd, I want y'all to also know that Raz is one of the top genocide scholars and Holocaust scholars. And you've been very outspoken about the genocide of Palestinians, testifying in front of the United Nations. You've even lost job offers to, I believe, the University of Minnesota. So why is it important for you as one of the top scholars in your field to take such a stance that you have taken and be so public about it? Well, especially in this time period where a lot of scholars are scared. They don't want to say things with their chest. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm a Israeli American Jewish Holocaust scholar, and my four grandparents survived World War II. That means that I actually take very seriously this idea of never again, right? This post-Holocaust idea of never again, which is translated, of course, in international law in the United Nations Genocide Convention, that is the Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. So prevention, which is never again, is in international law in that sense. It's one of actually the specific elements of the crime of genocide that we don't have with other crimes in international law, the obligation, the duty to prevent. So in one sense, you know, I think that Holocaust and genocide scholars all have, should have an ethical commitment to, this is what we do when we teach our students, right? To recognize warning signs, red flags, for instance, dehumanization, when we heard on the 9th of October, Israel's war minister, and I think we should call them war ministers, right? These people, referring to Palestinians in Gaza as human animals, right? And many other, of course, expressions of dehumanizing Palestinians well before October 2023, of course, right? This is a clear red flag in Holocaust and genocide studies, right? Again, we teach our students to, this is the rationale of studying the Holocaust. This is the rationale of studying genocide. So in that sense, it's natural, right? It should be natural for Holocaust and genocide studies scholars to be very sensitive to what's going on in our world and to call out these red flags, which were very clear very, very soon after the Hamas attack on October 7th, right? So that's one thing to say. But the other thing is that, you know, we've talked here about the international legal system, and I think that what we're seeing in Israel's attack on Gaza, again, the fact that it's so clear that it's genocide, is an accident of the system. Because the system was set up, again, with Israeli impunity, with the Jewish state as a unique state, where this was never supposed to happen. And of course, it's happening because Israeli Jews are understanding what they're doing very much in the frame of settler colonialism, specifically as a colonial war against barbarians. And it's very important to emphasize that international law actually emerged to regulate wars between, quote, civilized nations, that is, Europeans. It was never meant to apply to colonial warfare. And that's the reason that in colonial, what we would call today anti-terrorism, counterinsurgency, these kinds of things, the colonial powers operate as if outside the realm of law, because barbarians, quote unquote, human animals, don't deserve the protection of law. And that's how Israeli Jews are understanding what they're doing, and therefore they can express themselves in so clear and explicit ways, right? And do what they're doing that we all see in front of our eyes for 2 years now and ongoing through the ceasefire in which the fire has never really ceased. But that's an accident of the system. And when I say accident of the system, I mean that the system emerges, the international legal system reemerges after World War II, and genocide really is this new crime in the system of international law. But it's immediately in relation to what we call today the Holocaust. And no one used the word at the time. It would take a couple of decades until the word really emerges to refer to the genocide of the Jews. But what we call the Holocaust immediately is perceived as unique. And there's various reasons, as I explained in the module, that it's perceived as unique. And therefore, the state of Israel, right, the state of Holocaust survivors, is also perceived immediately as unique. And all this is in relation to the new crime of genocide. Therefore, the foundational crime of the Israeli state, the 1948 Nakba, which wasn't a secret, everyone saw it and knew about it, nevertheless had to be immediately denied. Nakba denial, therefore, becomes structural in the new international legal system based on the new crime of genocide. Nakba denial becomes structural in what we call today Holocaust memory. Nakba denial becomes structural in my field of Holocaust and genocide studies. It's a very strange name for a field, Holocaust and genocide studies, right? It is a reflection of this hierarchy where the Holocaust is unique, Jews are unique, Israel is unique. I'm saying all of this because this accident of the system is also an incredible moment of opportunity to change this flawed system. I agree with you completely, George, that the US and Israel are leading a very fierce campaign to destroy international law, right? To destroy the International Court of Justice, to destroy the International Criminal Court with sanctions on its chief prosecutors. We know that if the US government and the Israeli government don't want international law, we definitely want international law. But we want a different kind of international legal system. And I'll tell you more. I think that the international legal system has not only discarded Palestinians for decades. We live in a world with more than 123 million forcibly displaced people. 123 million forcibly displaced people. These are people that have been discarded by the international system for decades and decades. But think about this. The world that's coming, right? Think about global warming, right? Half of humanity today lives in areas where it will not be able to, we will not be able to live in those areas in 30, 40, 50, 60 years. It doesn't really matter. In our lifetime, in the lifetime of our children and our grandchildren. Very soon, right? Israel and the US are using Gaza as a model of lawlessness. This is what will happen, right, to people that dare to resist any kind of measures imposed on them, right? We desperately need a lot of things to prepare for this future that's present already, right? But we also need international law, and we need a different international legal system. The Gaza genocide in this case, and this connects to why it's very important to name it as genocide. It's very important to teach it as genocide. The Gaza genocide is also an incredible opportunity to change, but to maintain, but to change the international legal system, to make it a system that's much more responsive to the struggle on the streets that we've talked about. And I'll just say also that there is some evidence, right, that the massive demonstrations around the world, the grassroots level in fall 2023, right, where genocide was used as a mobilizing word, right, played some role in getting South Africa to submit the charge of genocide against Israel in the International Court of Justice. So there's a lot of interplay between the street and the courts, as it should be. And this is a moment of opportunity that we need to keep pushing, right, in order to change the system, to have the kind of international system of international law that we really need.
It's this boomerang effect, right? So it's this, we look at the foundation of genocide, right, how it's codified into law and puts the Holocaust, victims and survivors of the Holocaust as the foundation, and it's the legal work of Raphael Lemkin, right, who did a lot to pave the way for this understanding of genocide. But I think for me, I always want to try to contextualize it to liberation movements that are happening here as well. I know there was a sign when I walked in about Paul Robeson. Y'all familiar with Paul Robeson? Have you heard of the We Charge Genocide? Right? So when we think about black revolutionaries trying to charge the United Nations with genocide, they're taking the tools that they give them to try to also internationalize the issues of the genocide happening here for black people in this country, the genocide happening here for indigenous people in this country. But I think something that was interesting when I was doing some research around this is Raphael Lemkin actually denied the genocide of African people in this land. So thinking about the moral superiority to deny the transatlantic slave trade, to deny the genocide of African people, but at the same time say, no, there are other genocides that are more superior. So I think it's important for us to have this understanding of the law as a tool, but also how do we use the law as a tool to fight back, as using a tool of language, of charging genocide, of naming genocide for the first time as it has been in such an international way as a tool for movement building. Right, so there's a lot of education going on here in this room. I hope y'all is taking notes and having some good questions. There will be people to come around in a little bit to pick up your note cards and, have our own created algorithm and filtering through, and we'll figure out which questions we're gonna ask. But as we begin to think about education, right, Malcolm popularly saying education is the passport to our future. I'd like all of you to reflect on how can we use education as a tool for raising consciousness, as a tool for movement building and ultimately as a tool for liberation, because that's why we're here, right? So, Professor Bisharat, Brother George, if you kick it off for us. And
Sure. So, certainly every liberation movement I've studied or participated in has depended on education. And of course, it's not just in classrooms. We're not just talking about formal education, but also in the streets and unions, in faith communities, and now, of course, as the Palestine curriculum shows, online. Formal education gives us analytical tools and historical grounding, but informal education, storytelling, teach-ins, cultural expression, music, art, that's what transforms empathy into solidarity. And I think Palestinians have understood this for a long time. During the first Intifada, the first popular uprising against Israeli occupation that began in late 1987, the Israelis shut down schools and communities organized underground classrooms. And then, inside Israeli prisons, political education has flourished for decades. Prisoners organize study circles and they teach one another history and law, political theory, principles of collective struggle. And, we call these, we Palestinians call the prisons the universities of the national movement. So across generations, Palestinians have invested in education because it's the one thing that cannot be confiscated, unlike our homes and our orchards and our fields and our businesses. We always carry our education with us wherever we go. So Malcolm's insight that education is our passport to the future was really a call, I think, to prepare for power, to cultivate the knowledge that challenges domination and sustains hope, that brings together formal learning, history, analysis, and the like, and brings it together with empathy to create that solidarity. And I think that means for us, equipping movements, equipping all of us as individuals to decode propaganda, to understand law and power, and to link struggles. I think this is especially important, from Gaza to Ferguson, from apartheid walls to prison walls, because true education is never neutral. It's an act of liberation when it tells the truth and prepares us to act on it.
Yeah, I agree. I have a quote by Khalid al-Azraq, who was a Palestinian political prisoner who spent 20 years, over 20 years, in Israeli prisons. And he said, "In prison, I found what I was not expecting to find. I found inside the prison what I could not find outside of it. In prison, I found Palestine's political, national, revolutionary university. It was in prison that I realized that knowledge is what paves the road to victory and freedom." So that perfectly encapsulates what Dr. George was saying in terms of prisons being the universities for our people. I think something, though, that I want to add on top of that is, as someone that is Muslim and Palestinian, both those identities very much shape my organizing. My faith shapes my organizing, and my roots to Palestine shape my organizing as well. And so I say that because in Islam, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, when revelation was first revealed to him, Muslims believe that he was told Iqra, that the first word in the Quran was Iqra, which means read. And he was told read 3 times. This is an illiterate man. And so it's, you have to think to yourself, why would God tell an illiterate man to read 3 times, even though he said he couldn't? And it's not because he was telling the Prophet, peace be upon him, to read with his eyes, but it was to read with his heart. And I think that is something, when it comes to the topic of political education, that goes missing. Alhamdulillah, thank God, we have so many avenues for political education. I think all of us are witnesses to this genocide through the Instagram accounts that we follow of journalists in the ground. There is no denying the images that we see. Many of us, before Amnesty International decided to put out a report and call it a genocide, have witnessed this with our own eyes. But education is powerful when it's accompanied with action. And I think that's something that we have to remember. You can go, many orgs are doing amazing research like Pal Auda to look into the ports that are available in New Jersey and to see how many shipments are going to be sent out to Israel that day. But just knowing that is not enough. You have to be able to go and talk to port workers, and you have to be able to go and talk to people and accompany that education with true action. Similar to know your rights in the legal field. It's not enough to just know the law, but you need to be able to accompany it with action. And so I think that's something when we learn about education, we're not just here to free our minds, but to use that intellectual knowledge and to keep it pushing. And a quote that I always say and that I always think stands true by Bassel al-Araj, who there's a theme, is probably one of my favorite Palestinian revolutionaries, but he said, if you wish to be an intellectual, you must be entangled. If you do not wish to be entangled, then there is no use for you or your intellectualism. Many of the movement and the people in Palestine did not go to these universities, these prison universities, just simply to educate themselves and to learn, but to go and to fulfill that for their community. And so that's something that we have to keep in mind.
Thank you. Ross?
Yeah, I mentioned denial before and how Nakba denial is so structural. And for me, a lot of what I do is teach, right? For me, education is a very strong commitment to truth. And sure, we can talk, about different perspectives and the concept of truth, but some of what's the way that at least for me, I experience a lot of what's going on in the last 2 years. For instance, here in the U.S., but in other places, is that we would all be standing, say, outside in the middle of the day. And it's clear that it's the middle of the day, and someone would come and say, no, it's the middle of the night. And then, no, we would say, it's the middle of the day. They say, no, it's the middle of the night, and if you say that it's the middle of the day, you're an anti-Semite, right? That's how it, and that's the kind of assault on truth, on, as you said, Malik, what we can see. But we don't need, the BBC. We definitely don't need the New York Times, or, we see the truth, right? But there is a continued assault on this truth. And for me, education is very much about highlighting the truth, but also trying to give students, community members, to give a sense of the urgency of insisting on the truth in all interactions, always, all the time, because that's, again, otherwise there are so many reasons always, right, not to insist on the truth. We're scared, we don't want to lose our jobs, we don't feel that we know enough, right? Or sometimes it touches indeed on this issue of, especially when we're talking about Palestine and Israel and Jews and the Jewish state and these kinds of things, right? Someone comes and says, well, are you against the right of the Jewish state to exist, right? This kind of, that you mentioned, George, in your module, right? Israel's right to exist, right? The truth would be not only that there is no such thing as a state's right to exist in international law, there's a people's right to exist in international law, right? The truth would be that genocide states don't have a right to exist. Would it be reasonable to ask during the Holocaust, after the Holocaust, if Nazi Germany had a right to exist as a Nazi genocide state? How absurd would that be, right? That's the same thing. Genocide states don't have a right to exist. That's a truth, right? That's very scary to express for a lot of people for very good reasons, but it's very important to express because, as you said, Malik, we're here for the long-term liberation, for a different kind of political organization between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, for something beyond a genocide state, beyond a settler state, beyond the Jewish supremacist state, right? One of the ways to reach it is that more people, more times in all interactions would insist, right, on this sort of truth. And it shouldn't be anything special, because there is nothing special actually, really, in Israel, in the Jewish state, in Jews. There's also nothing special in that sense in Israel's genocide in Gaza or in Palestine. We have to normalize all of this, right? And it's part of insisting on these truths that, for me as an educator, is really a key part of how I see my job.
Thank you all. There's a lot of big themes going on, from prison intellectualism, right, from community movements to education in the streets. And I would encourage people to think about, how are our communities a classroom, right? Because if we look around in the space, if we look at each other and see who's in the space, is this a resemblance of the community? Or is the community the people outside, right, in the streets? How are we going to bring education to them? How are we going to bring these conversations of Palestine and the liberation of Palestine and make it relatable to someone in Harlem who just got their EBT cut, who just got their SNAP cut, but might not know anything about Palestine except for what they see in the news? How are we going to educate people who might be illiterate, right? We think about Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, read. Do we think about that, about people who cannot read? Right? Like, I work with youth. I work with some of these kids. I work with adults. I work with folks sometimes who do not know how to read. So how are we going to make education in a way to where it's accessible for those people who don't know how to read? Right? If we think about Malcolm when he was incarcerated, he read the dictionary. Think about Huey P. Newton. He was illiterate at one point. He taught himself how to read. And these are people who have made significant contributions to black liberation movements, all over the world. Right, so as we conclude, I want us to think about this last question in this political moment that we're in this historical moment, in this moment to where all violation of morals is constantly taking place. How do we here, living in the historical terrain of a settler colony, the historical terrain of a nation that is founded on the genocide of African people, a nation that is founded on the genocide of indigenous people, a constitution that was legally codified by white men with the teeth of enslaved people in their mouth. What do you suggest as panelists? How can we apply that knowledge to also understanding the struggle for Palestine and this greater struggle for humanity? Roz, we'll start with you, then Professor Bisharat, then Malakwa.
So how do we turn education into action?
How do we turn it into action, and how do we think about the Palestinian struggle right here where we're at, and how do we fight?
Yeah. I think two things I would say about this. One is that I think it's very important that, as I mentioned global warming before, but I think that it's important that people understand that the struggle, not just in a kind of general way, that these struggles around the world are interconnected, but because the US and Israel are using Gaza now as a model in a very stark way, then the struggle for Palestine really has to do with their own lives. They should try to imagine how their lives would look like, right, in a lawless world. That's the vision that the US and the Israeli governments are preparing for us. So there's ways to tie the struggle in Palestine to people's lives, right, in very direct ways. That's what I try to do in the classroom with students. That's what I try to do when I speak in various places. And the other thing I would say is that, and that's maybe a very American kind of thing, I find that a lot of people in the US, and don't really understand how struggles against fascism work historically, right? Because they tend to think that struggles could happen without them losing anything, right? Which is very strange. That's not how struggles against fascism work historically. When you struggle against fascism, when you literally struggle for your life, you're gonna lose things. That's how it is, right? But you're gonna lose things because there are indeed, potential for very significant gains for you and for everyone around you, right? So I think it's important to emphasize to people that, yes, going to a big demonstration, right, where there's a lot of children and elderly people and it's safe because there's less chance that the police will beat you up, right, is good. You should definitely go to that demonstration, right? But as you said, Malik, I think in your module, if I'm not mistaken, right, the struggle just begins in the demonstration, right? It goes to many spheres from there, right? It is risky. If people talk today, they're not just silenced, they're censored. As I said, they lose their job, they're arrested. No one wants to be beaten up by police, right? Just that, but there's far more greater consequences. It's worth the struggle because the struggle is about Palestine, but the struggle is about all of us, right? So I think that's very important to emphasize. We have a lot to lose, but we also have tremendously a lot and urgently to gain.
Thank you. Professor Bisharat?
Sure. So I think, what's happened in the last 2 years that is unique in my experience, and as I said, I've been a participant and an observer of this struggle for nearly 60 years. What's unique is the level of understanding and sympathy with the Palestinian struggle in the West, levels that we've never really seen before. The thing is, sympathy is great, but it has to now be translated into strategy. It has to be translated into sustained organizing, cutting the flow of weapons, building economic and cultural boycotts, supporting prosecutions under universal jurisdiction, defending truth tellers who reveal state crimes. And it also means weaving the Palestinian struggle into the global movement against racial capitalism and settler colonialism, and understanding Gaza not as an exception, but as a mirror held up to the world. And I absolutely fully concur with Raz's statement just a moment ago about Gaza as a model for the future for many peoples throughout the world. We, of course, as we do this, we who are Palestinian and who have been engaged in this struggle for a long time, solidarity has to be reciprocal. And we have to give as much solidarity as we hope to receive. And that has to be rooted in a really deep recognition of the indivisibility of global struggles for justice. What happens to Palestinians is connected to what happens to Black and Indigenous and oppressed peoples everywhere. I just want to say, my final point, this entire project is powered by love, not by hate. Love of people, of humanity, and also by a belief in human redemption. And I just, some of those that we now see as our opponents or even our enemies may in time become allies. Not everyone will. There are people who are sadly beyond redemption, but many might. And when they do, I think we have to be ready to welcome them with open hearts. The goal, of course, is not vengeance, it's liberation for Palestinians and for all of us. I mean, we're all bound in a single fabric of humanity.
Take us home, please.
I think, I don't have much to add beyond what my co-panelists have already said, so I think I'll just share a few personal beliefs. I think the biggest thing that I really just want to drive home is reinforcing the notion that we are all organizers. I think that sometimes, even with these panels, it's so easy to think, I need to go to law school to do this. I need to get a master's in public policy. I need to already be part of the organizing field for over 6 years and to have this organizer resume, quote unquote, whatever that even means. But we are all organizers and we all have a role to play in this. My great-grandfather was a Palestinian freedom fighter. He was a resistance fighter, and he was tortured very severely in Israeli prisons. His fingernails were plucked with pliers and then sent to my great-grandmother, who is alive and is illiterate to this day. And just because she's illiterate doesn't make her any less of an amazing fighter for the resistance, that she would hide men in the basement of her home and stand up to IOF soldiers even though she's 5'2" and illiterate. I think about the fact that, in Islam we have this belief that the ummah, the community, is like one body. When one part feels pain, we all feel pain. And so I think a lot of us can relate to the fact that our anger and our what is going on to our Palestinian brothers and sisters is enough to be able to give us the agency to go out and organize in our own ways. I think about the fact that when I was in Palestine, I did a legal internship. I did juvenile defense for a summer after my first year of law school. And I went to Palestine, and I was outside of the Ibrahimi Mosque in Al Khalil in Hebron, which is where my dad's side of the family is from. And there was an IOF soldier who tried to stop me and demand that she wanted to see my papers. She didn't know I was a US citizen passport holder because I don't look like one on the outside to her. So she thought that I was breaking the boundaries of where Palestinian residents were allowed to go. And so she's a girl that is no older than 19, carrying an AK-47, staring in my face with her acrylic nails and her AK-47, demanding that she's gonna take me for interrogation. And when I tell her, no, I'm not going with you, in plain English, she's shocked. And I see in her eyes, I see fear. And I see, as this is all happening, that there was a group of kids that were playing soccer, maybe 6, maybe 7 years old, that started to form a line between me and her, to form a barrier with their own bodies. That these were kids with just a soccer ball in the West Bank who, honestly, if she was to use that weapon and to martyr them, perhaps no one would have cared. Perhaps the media would not have cared. They would have been another statistic, but they still felt that they had the agency to be able to do that. I think of my coworkers that I worked with in the West Bank, who one of them said that he would spend up to 3 hours in the grocery store trying to boycott Israeli products in the West Bank, which is incredibly difficult, that he would look at barcodes and you would know if it was Israeli based on the first 3 numbers of the barcode on the product. But he felt that they had already taken their land and they had already put him and his family at so much risk that this felt like the power and what he could do to reclaim that back. And I think about my own self at Berkeley when I went to that sit-in, when I went to that protest, and it was only us and around 9 other people in a class of 355. And then when I did stand up with a mic and got assaulted by one of the professors there while our dean stood by, I think to myself at the fact that we were only 9 people going to just say and do something, because we felt that it was disgusting to us that our university was able to host a grand feast while people are starving in Gaza. And I think to myself, it took only 9 law students standing there to take down a Zionist dean and a professor that had anti-Black, racist, Islamophobic politics and had a name for themselves when they were already in their 60s and 70s. And so I think this is a good reminder that we have so much agency, and people in Gaza have shown us that. When you look at videos, they don't say, feel bad for us. A lot of the videos, if you notice, especially the ones in Arabic sometimes that go untranslated for certain reasons, they say that we're not worried about us, we're worried about all of you. We're worried about all of you that are able to be so blinded by capitalism and so blinded by the wealth that you want to obtain that you have lacked meaning in your life, that you're able to sit by while you don't even know if your neighbors are hungry or not. And so I say that to say that, just to end with actually a Palestinian voice who was recently martyred, Salah al-Jafarawi, who was a Palestinian journalist. He had memorized the entire Quran, and this is from his will that he wrote before he was martyred. And he said, If I am martyred, know that I have not departed. I am now in paradise with my companions who preceded me, with Anas, Ismail, and all the loved ones who remain true to their covenant with Allah. I urge you to uphold the resistance, the path we have walked and the approach we have believed in. We have known no other path for ourselves, nor found meaning in life except in steadfastness upon it. I think that we have to remember that they have been upholding the resistance, and we need to start to adopt this mindset that we must come to know and embody that we can know no other path for ourselves, no other meaning in life except steadfastness and adherence to resistance.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a lot of good questions. There's been a lot of fire answers, and I think we'll continue that theme, inshallah. So I'm going to try to put a few of them together and kind of, reword some of them as well so we can get at all of them, the themes that are all in these questions. But the first one I want to start with, which I think is important, is going around this theme of how we have educational materials, but also thinking about how education materials in the wrong hands sometimes can create issues for resistance movements, right? So the question is, in a highly surveilled world, how do you ensure secrecy to ensure educational material is not going to expose movement work where there needs to be levels of secrecy, especially if we think about, this one right now, it's on Zoom. We don't know who's hacked into here, right? And we have to have real conversations where it's a hell of technology everywhere and iPhones in our pockets and listening devices everywhere in New York. So how do we, as educators, and maybe I'll chime in at the end a little bit too, how do we think about secrecy as well as the idea of what we need to educate on? How do we determine where we're not exposing movements to now where the U.S. government and professors who work for the imperial academic order are using that research to contain, to destroy, and surveil and disrupt movements? Does anyone want to take the first jab at it?
I mean, I can with a relatively simple response, which is the word discretion. There are things that can be communicated electronically and the like in writing, etc. And there are things that should be communicated in person. People, I think, probably need to make the assumption that anything that is communicated via an electronic device is surveillable and probably surveilled. People just have to use common sense and communicate about certain things only in the most direct personal ways.
Thank you for that. Anyone else? That's all right. I could add something, if y'all don't mind. Is that all right? Could I put a panelist hat on? Is that good? All right, for sure. So some of y'all might know or don't know, but one of my family members is Jalil Muntaqim. He was a political prisoner of war. He was in the Black Panther Party, a part of the Black Liberation Army, and he did 49 years in prison and was just released about 5 years ago. If folks are familiar with George Jackson, it was alleged that he retaliated, but he was incarcerated under COINTELPRO, Richard Nixon, right? And these are verifiable paperwork that we have showing that Richard Nixon and Nuke Kill, these different government programs, were used to surveil and destroy. He wrote a book in prison called We Are Our Own Liberators. It is a guiding ideological text to the work that we do at people's programs. Essentially, it's an organizing handbook. I don't know if they have it in the bookstore yet. If not, if there's someone I could talk to, we're going to make something shake, hopefully. In his book, he talks about the Black Liberation Army. The Black Liberation Army was the underground fighting force that emerged as in response to the white supremacist violence, to the genocidal violence, to the counterintelligence programs used by the FBI, CIA, NYPD that were systematically used to destroy movements. And in the book, he talks about the Black Liberation Army. And one thing he does with the BLA is he only uses information that they had, right? So he's doing his own research to understand what does the government have that is already put out there, and he's talking about these alleged, responses of using, if you think about United Nations and international law, the rights that colonized people have for armed responses to colonial violence, right? So what he does is he very publicly uses what they have to say, hey, this is what has happened. I cannot confirm if any of it's true. But that, I think, is a level of integrity that actually is keeping comrades safe versus saying, hey, this is what we did. Like, why are you going to snitch on yourself? And sometimes we got to think about that. Like, what do we put on Instagram stories? What stories do we tell, where it's like a reaction? It's like you just giving them every single information. So I think when we think about education, it kind of brings us into this next question, is how do we responsibly have education, right? Thinking about what motivates people to become educators, right? What motivates people to have knowledge, and what motivates y'all to, as experts in the field, right, to be so public facing with your education. So yeah, what is the importance of essentially Palestine 101 and this method of it being digital education that can be used essentially open source and for free for people all over the world to be able to engage with? So what does it mean for y'all as educators? Roz?
I think that if I understood correctly, the question is, why to become an educator? Or
why to be so public facing with this Palestine 101 curriculum? Why is it important for you as scholars in your field to engage in this type of work, especially everyone here for the most part is working in the college level, right? Or working in a level maybe not with middle schoolers or high schoolers, right? So why is it important to create this knowledge, distribute it so publicly, and make it available as an educator, right, or as a professor?
I mean, I think that for me, for instance, I think there's a lot of knowledge about how the nation-state system is flawed, okay? Because it's exclusionary, right? It's based on, states that are supposed to be homogenous, Hungary for Hungarians, Poland for Poles, Israel for Jews, so on and so forth, all according to national terms, these kinds of things, right? So when I think about Palestine, and again, this kind of moment, on the one hand, and we really need to continue to center this really unbelievably horrific moment, right? And then we also have this moment of potential to challenge the nation-state system, right, in this very paradigmatic place of Palestine, Israel, right? As I said, to change the political system, the political structure in Palestine, Israel. And for me, I care about that place, and I think that there is a future for all the people who live in that place, for Palestinians, for Jews, for, as I said at the end of my module, right, for everyone who lives between the river and the sea, but not in the current political system, not in the Israeli nation state that I mentioned, the nation state basic law, not in the Israeli settler state, right? So it's both the personal, I care about that place, and I also think that this is a moment of opportunity, for instance, to think more broadly, because it's not just Palestine, Israel, right? I mean, the nation state system everywhere is very flawed, very exclusionary, very violent, very discriminatory, right? So there's an opportunity here through Palestine, Israel, for a broader struggle. But it's also, again, as I said, it's a place that I care about deeply. I care about the people there, and that that drives me in my work, and that drives me in being public about my work.
Yeah, I think very similarly. Just to add, I think about the fact that we know that Palestine is going to be free, and that's not just a wish, it's a promise. And I think about that because when I went to Palestine, did that legal internship, I had to be in Ramallah, which is an area where my family is not from. And so I ended up being able to secure housing. And I had always thought my family, my mom's side is from Abu Ghosh, right outside of Jerusalem. My dad's side is from Al-Khalil, from Hebron. I'd always thought our history was that we'd always stayed there until we were expelled in 1967 to Jordan. And then comes to find out that as I'm talking to family, it turns out that the very street that I had chose to live on and the very apartment building that I chose to been in was actually the last place that my great-grandmother had lived. That she had actually gone to Ramallah before they had been expelled with my great-grandfather and engaged in resistance. And there's something beautiful about the fact that 4 generations ago, they were standing there on their land and they were expelled, and 4 generations later, their great-great-granddaughter would come back and be the first one in their family to come to Palestine and then to earn a JD and then to be able to work and live in America and talk about Palestine and be public-facing. And so I feel similarly that I owe an obligation to my ancestors, and I owe an obligation to all the people in Gaza that sacrifice their children and they sacrifice their lives to be able to educate us. So how about me, who has the privileges of being able to be raised here, where I have the safety of having a home and a roof over my head, which is not guaranteed for everyone in this country. I think the second thing, just to add on, again, a basic note, is these curriculums and these modules, knowledge is power. And seeing the curriculum itself, you see how accessible the language is. I think something that I really do not miss about going to law school or academia in general is the inaccessibility of it all. I grew up raised by a single mom in the streets of Chicago, who came to America a month before 9/11, terrible timing, and learned English, I didn't come with a fancy degree and a background. And yet, something that I've observed is the respectability politics of knowledge. I know that people, for the first time in my life, take me seriously because they see that JD. And that's unfortunate, even though I've been talking about Palestine for years. But that is a reality of the world we live in. And that's something I love about these curriculums, is that it's going to empower everyone to feel like they're able to have access to this knowledge. I think even, I shared with my mom the module and when I was preparing, and my mom has always been the keep your head down, we live in America, we don't need to be targeted, and that's an unfortunate result of the oppression and surveillance and Islamophobia we all experience post 9/11. But she felt empowered enough that our local grocery store that's immigrant owned decided to sell Coca-Cola, but they had a ceasefire now sign, and Coca-Cola is on the boycott list. And she said to herself, that's weird. And she said, you know what, I'm going to go confront the store owner. And she goes and she confronts the store owner. And she had spoken to him in Arabic since he was from that region. And he decided to try to embarrass her and speak in English and say, you don't know what you're talking about. And she was able to bring up things from the modules about the importance of boycotting. And she said, my daughter's a lawyer, which had nothing to do with anything. But, she felt like she had a right to say that, but she felt empowered because of the modules. And so I think that simple example is just a beautiful one, and I can't wait to see how many young kids, how many middle schoolers, high schoolers, anyone, elder folks, anyone in the community is going to be able to benefit.
So our last one is coming back to a similar theme of international law, right, and the hegemonic structures of it. So the question is, should we remain optimistic about the current international law structures to prevent genocide? And should we be pushing for a change in the Article 2 definition of genocide? And maybe how would that change take place? That's a good question as well to add to that. So to our international legal scholar.
Sure. Well, I think international law and international legal institutions, the institutions that are charged with the responsibility of enforcing international law have demonstrated their weaknesses and their shortcomings, especially sharply in the last 2 years. The United Nations system was deeply flawed from the beginning, particularly in the organization, in the distribution of power between the General Assembly and the the Security Council. The Security Council basically has sole power to actually take forceful action, to use sanctions, to authorize the use of military force, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, we know the 5 permanent members of the Security Council all have veto authority over any resolution. So you have one power, as you know, the United States voted 7 times to to veto resolutions in favor of ceasefire in Gaza over the last 2 years. That structure has to be reformed, has to be made more representative of world humanity and of the the other nations that have not had that privileged status. In terms of reforms to to the Genocide Convention, I think that the most problematic aspect of that convention is the requirement of special intent, and the interpretations that international courts have used in interpreting or in finding evidence of special intent. And just, I don't want to go into this at length, but the idea is that genocide is constituted by a number of acts: killing people, depriving them of the means of survival, et cetera, et cetera. But it has to be accompanied by the intent to destroy a group in whole or in part as such. And that's the part, the intent part, the acts part have been relatively easy to prove in a number of cases, and they are extremely evident in the case of Gaza. The intent part is the one that has proved more problematic. And I think that there are some rulings of the International Court of Justice that have made it harder to prove intent. And I think one of the things that can be done in terms of revising the law would be clarifying how intent can be proved. You don't have to necessarily eliminate the requirement of special intent, but we do have to make it easier to prove. And to the particular issue is whether whether intent has to be proved if the evidence that we're using is solely indicative of genocidal intent. The fact is that genocidal intent is often accompanied by other goals. So, self-defense can be a motivation or a form of intent, but if genocide is the way in which that self-defense is being exercised, that should clearly constitute, should meet the requirement of intent. Sorry if that sounds a little technical, but I thought the question asked for that.
Thank you. We appreciate you. And thank you to all the panelists for your insightful answers, not only on the stage and via Zoom, but also for creating such a great content and being so easy to work with and make it happen, because it's not easy. I know a good 9-minute video looks good, but it takes a lot of time, a lot of practice to be able to do this, right? So,
can I just add something about that, actually?
Yeah, real quickly.
Very quickly, because I think it's important. One of the issues is the connection between war and genocide, right? And these are two separate bodies of law, because genocide is theoretically could happen both in peace and in war, even though it almost always happens in the context of war, whereas the international body about war is international humanitarian law. So it's separate bodies of war, and therefore a lot of genocide denial historically, also in the case of Gaza, is about this is war, we don't have genocidal intent, we're targeting Hamas, the paradigmatic case of denying genocide by claiming war is the Armenian genocide in the Ottoman Empire during World War I. So I think that one of the things to say is that in this case, what Israel is doing in Gaza fits Article 2 of the Genocide Convention very clearly, right? But if we're thinking about the kind of changes that we might want to have, is not necessarily to change Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, but to really delve much more clearly into, which touches on your comment, George, right, about genocidal intent, but to delve on this, to be much more clear about the connection of war and genocide and how, and this could be very much informed actually by education and by looking historically at how genocides usually have unfolded and unfold in the context of war. So I just wanted to add this brief comment.
Thank you. Thank you. Round of applause one more time for everybody. So, as George was mentioning, Brother George over here in person, I know it's a few Georges, right? To go to your phone and to go to learningpalestine.org so you can stay updated as we release this curriculum, as we make education accessible, free, and digitally available no matter where you are in the world, right? We see so many people with the having access to information now with phones, right? So when there's a question around how do you intend to get in the right hands, is also you all are a part of that, right? Because it's going to be open source, it's going to be able to be shared. This is a call to action we have from y'all, is to engage with this education, to be able to share it with teachers, share it with family members, share it with your mother so she might be able to go to a bodega and tell them they got to get, Coca-Cola out, right? So it's designed for youth, but as we're seeing it, it's accessible for everyone, right? So without further ado, I'd like to welcome George back up and bring us to the conclusion.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Dr. Bisharat as well. I don't know if you can see me right here, but salute.
I can't.
And thank you all so much for spending the time with us on a Saturday. You could have been doing a lot of stuff, but we all have a stake in this, and I think that's going to be one of the most important takeaways that we all should have from this event. We all have an obligation. We all have a responsibility. We all have a role within the revolution. We need to really take time and think about what skills we should apply. How do we fit into that? A lot of us might fit one or multiple categories of that responsibility, of those skills that you can offer, whether it's in your local or global context, right? So yeah, I don't have any other words to say, but thank you. I'm grateful beyond words for your thoughtfulness, your patience, and listening, and your heart. Thank you for showing up. Thank you.
Thanks, George.
All right. Peace, brother.